Judicial Watch doesn't just sue in court, but we're having to fight in court, literally fight in court against Robert Kennedy's NIH. Another court hearing took place in a key Judicial Watch piece of litigation. It took place here in Washington, D.C. before Judge Mehta, who is a U.S. District Court judge. I think he's been on the bench a while now. I think he was appointed by President Obama. But we've got this case that's been going on for 5 years. We sued on behalf of Open the Books. You may have heard about Open the Books. They publish government data and budgetary data, basic information about what the government's spending on what. It's just great work. Just great work. So they're really a perfect group for Judicial Watch to work with, because they want information about what the government's spending, and we want the transparency too. And so we represented them in a specific case trying to get records about royalty payments to government employees at NIH for inventions they've been involved in. Now I'm going to summarize what the issue is here generally. So folks like Dr. Fauci and other experts at NIH sometimes invent, working for the government, new vaccines, new medications, new inventions generally. And the NIH tries to license those inventions for use, because what good is it to have a development to help people if other people aren't being helped, if there's no way of getting it out to the marketplace? And then what they do is they work with outside companies to license these inventions. They get licensing fees once those deals are set up, and a portion of those fees go to the inventors. And it's a relatively modest portion when you look into it, and it doesn't mean it's not an important issue to talk about, but the numbers are limited, I think, to, in theory, $150,000 a year. That's the total number of license fees that any NIH researcher can get. So in the greater schemes of things, is it a huge amount of money? No. But when you have the intersection of government employees with private sector companies, there's opportunities for conflicts of interest and other ethics issues that pop up, which is why we want full disclosure about who and how much is who's getting royalty fees and how much. Like Dr. Fauci gets royalty fees. We don't know how much. And I think he said, I don't object to releasing it, but the government objects to releasing it. So we've been in this case. It's already covered and exposed pretty much everything you know about the issue. Senator Rand Paul's been big on this issue, and you may have seen reports about it with Open the Books. And right now, their government's taking the position that if they release the specific license fees that people get, the royalties, then somehow we'll be able to walk back and figure out what the license fees generally are that are being paid to the government. And that information is supposedly confidential, because it's government business, it's business information that's confidential, which I don't buy, but presumably, let's say that's the case. First of all, it's impossible to walk back the numbers, practically speaking. So it's not true. But Judge Mehta wanted to have a hearing on it to figure out, well, what's going on here? Is it true? What's the thinking here? And so we had a hearing on just a few days ago. I think it was Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? Called me? I forget. And it was really something else. I knew the government's thinking was kind of was completely at odds with reality, or with logic. But there was a witness for the government who's a senior official at NIH who's involved in contracting issues. And she told the court, she said, look, I took two royalty payments, or a series of royalty payments, single royalty payments, and I easily walked it back to the actual licensing fee, which is supposed to be secret. Now, the only way she was able to do that, supposedly, was because she knew what the licensing fee was. So she could literally check her work. If you don't know what the licensing fee is, you're going to be guessing necessarily whether you got it right or not, assuming you followed her logic. But she goes up and she testifies that she did this, and then our lawyer said, well, wait, did you see your math is wrong? So the expert goes up and says how easy it is to get to point C from point A, and the math from A to B to C is wrong. It was just an incredible, frankly, it was just incredible to see. And I was just sitting there shaking my head. And I'm sitting and watching in the court audience. You know, the person seemed perfectly nice, but she got the math wrong. And her testimony to me was not credible at all as a result. And she's the expert for the government. She testified at least a half a dozen times. I'm no expert. So I didn't know what she was I didn't know what value she was to the court, who's trying to figure out whether or not to give us access to this information. And then a FOIA officer for NIH testified, and you know, she wasn't all that much reassuring in terms of her knowledge of the way the FOIA process worked and such. And so I raise these issues because it's important to know that Judicial Watch doesn't just sue in court, but we're having to fight in court, literally fight in court against Robert Kennedy's NIH. I mean, it's been years we've been asking about these records. And you would think Robert Kennedy, given his skepticism of some of the public health things and trying to restore confidence in the public in NIH and the way it operates, there's no, people think people are getting money on the side. Well, how is it you restore confidence? Well, you're transparent about what money they get. I mean, the NIH official who testified said, the number of people who get $150,000 in NIH as a result of royalty fees annually, she said there's maybe 20 or 30 people. And it may be no big deal, or it may be a big deal, but we don't know the detail. Who is getting the money? So we had our lawyers there. You know, we had 3 lawyers there. We had our witness from Open the Books, client. And then the government had 3 or 4 lawyers, plus 2 federal employee witnesses. So your government, under Robert Kennedy's Health and Human Services, just spent a boatload of money fighting Judicial Watch in court to deny us basic information about who is getting royalty fees and how much. So that's kind of my thumbnails. I know it's not a thumbnail, but my summary of the battle we had in court earlier this week. I want to make sure there's nothing interesting I'm missing to help you better understand it. So this is the reason we had the hearing. He ordered the hearing after finding a genuine dispute of material fact regarding the NIH's claim that releasing the royalty payments made to individual employees would reveal confidential commercial information from third parties' licensing agreements or patents. The NIH argues that the outsiders could allegedly back-calculate confidential royalty rates and payments made by licensees if the amount paid to the government inventors was disclosed. And as I discussed, the witness got up there and she didn't show that was the case. In fact, she highlighted that it would be nearly impossible to do so. We argued that disclosing the amounts paid to government employees does not reveal confidential commercial information and is required under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. The watchdog groups contend that NIH's theory is speculative and improperly used to conceal how much taxpayer-funded government employees receive in royalty income. This is compensation. So I'm calling them licensing fees or royalty fees. It's compensation. I mean, they only get the royalty fees through the sufferance of the government. It's a compensation amount. It's literally compensation. And NIH doesn't want us to know, HHS and the Justice Department doesn't want us to know what the full compensation is of NIH employees. And as I said, these numbers are not huge individually. It just doesn't make any sense they would be huge individually unless something else is happening, which I'll tell you about later. Now, it's billions to the government because who gets the biggest cut of the NIH inventions? The NIH. Your tax dollars, right? But they're trying to provide some incentive and recognition of the expert NIH employees, doctors, scientists, etc., who are making these inventions. In earlier rulings in the case, Judge Mehta rejected the NIH's effort to broadly shield the royalty programs using employee privacy claims, writing that federal government employees have a limited privacy interest in information concerning their compensation. So this is what this is, the compensation. So Fauci's name shows up a lot in these documents. He's the most well-known individual here. So in the end, this is about why can't we know how much Fauci was making from royalty payments in NIH when he was working there? Why? And the court also emphasized a strong public interest in disclosure, noting that transparency regarding royalty payments could help the public assess whether inventors' financial interest in licensed technologies could potentially bias the design, conduct, or reporting of clinical research. Mehta further concluded that the public interest in understanding these financial arrangements is significant, particularly when government scientists involved in taxpayer-funded biomedical research may receive payments tied to the commercialization of these technologies. I highlighted why there's useful public interest reasons for allowing these royalty programs to take place. But you don't need to be a rocket scientist or an NIH scientist to recognize the negative consequences of such programs. It could direct, for instance, if a scientist sees, well, the money's in topic A or invention A, even though the public health impact is limited, but the money's more likely there, that may direct their efforts. As opposed to invention B that could save a whole bunch of people, but there isn't the big money involved with it. I mean, we could go through all scenarios about how it could distort the process. And this isn't a free market, so where the market decides. This is government money that's being deployed as a result of where these inventors, where these scientists choose to focus their research and development. So it's a really interesting issue. And the more you know, the better. It's your money at issue here. I mean, NIH could take the position, no one gets the royalty here. You're working for us. The public owns everything you invent, and to the degree there's any money coming in, it's coming in to help fund more inventions and more work here at NIH. Or maybe NIH should get no money at all. Why the government did it in the public interest, bid it out to a company, and that's the end of the relationship. Or you could take the more, I would say, principled position and say, why is the NIH engaged in research at all? But just private companies do it, and there'd be no issue in who gets paid in the public from the public payroll in what essentially is work designed to bolster the bottom line of corporations who benefit from the licenses. So it's a real interesting case. But it's frustrating that we're fighting this administration over it. Again, we've been fighting it for 5 years. Over $2.685 billion was paid to NIH institutes or scientists, of which more than $1 billion was marked for inventors. So those royalty payments total up over time to a lot of money. And that was just for the period 2010 to 2023. So I'm wondering if the stated limit is what it is, and so our clients open the books. So they started asking questions about that issue subsequently, because as I said, there are these annual statutory limits of supposedly 150,000. But it looks like there may be ways to evade that limit by rolling over royalty payments and just building and building and building them. And the testimony last week or this week suggests that that's not the case, but we wanted to test it by asking for records about these royalty payments or overpayments exceeding or payments exceeding 150. Supposedly, if they get more than 150 in royalty licensing fees, the excess over 150 supposedly just goes to the government. Well, we think something else might be going on. So we asked for the records. We got the proverbial hand to the face, and so we sued. So, you know, I know we talk a lot about COVID and the accountability and the concerns about the public health issues and conflicts of interest and such, and everyone else wants to forget about it. But Judicial Watch just doesn't forget. And of course, one of the reasons we don't forget is because we never get all the documents that we're due, so we're stuck litigating them for years and years trying to get this core information about the way NIH operates. Like I said, royalty payments to NIH employees may be a non-scandal, but the cover-up of the amounts of those employees that we've been fighting in court, including in a very expensive court battle just this week with a half a dozen lawyers plus arguing on your dime, that is a scandal. And the fact that we can't get the numbers, maybe there is something to hide. That's what I conclude often. If you can't follow the law and come up with silly excuses to prevent public transparency, the first question I have is, why are you hiding this? What are you concerned about? So we have to file a brief in the middle of next month on this evidentiary case, of this evidentiary hearing, and then presumably Judge Mehta will decide shortly thereafter whether FOIA law requires the disclosure of this information to the American people through this Judicial Watch litigation on behalf of Open the Books. Open the books. That's the least we can expect from our government. So I'll let you know as things develop. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.